Okay, it's about 8:36 p.m. Central Standard Time, and welcome to week number 5. Week 5. You know what that means? It means we got one more week to go, and next week is it. Today is the 7th. 10 days from now, the course will be over, and hopefully that you guys are paying close attention to what I said about assignments. Weeks 1 to 3 assignments can no longer be turned in as of last week. And secondly, if you did, you still would lose points. And then the next thing I want to say is that you're going to have to make sure that in the last few weeks, or last week, this week, and next week, that you get those rubrics right. You pay attention to my comments. One of the most common issues of many of you in your papers is you don't have the proper paper length, and then you don't have citations in the body or references at the end. Always very, very, very important. And not many of you, but a few of you submitted PDF documents, which is a no-no. No. Okay, so it's important that we get those done correctly. One student used Wikipedia as a reference, and that lost them 10 points because I've stressed, even in the rubric, there is no Wikipedia allowed because it's not a credible source. So anyway, tonight we're gonna get started with sharing my screen for week 6. Okay, and here it comes. All right, there it is. And I'm going to do the student preview for just a minute. So this is what you can see. So messages, you should have the PowerPoints for week number 5 that I sent you by now. If you can't find them or don't have them, let me know. But I did send them out. I sent them out Sunday as well. Okay, so you want to make sure you check that. As far as the grade book is concerned, remind you that's where you find your rubric. So let's look at the assignments for this week. We have drunk driving, and that initial post is due tonight, and your reply post is due Saturday, September the 11th. And then your written assignment has a hate crime been committed, September the 12th, which is Sunday. And your live classroom lecture phrase that I'll give you today will be due. So we're wrapping up. So let's look at the discussion. All right. So here's the topic. You have this fact pattern here, and you're going to read it over, and then for your initial post that's due tonight, consider the scenario and the elements of criminal law of impaired driving discussed in this lesson, and that you should have discovered from your reading as well as from the PowerPoint and what I'll talk about tonight. And the question is, has the crime of drunk or drugged driving been committed? If so, by the male, by the female, or both? Explain your position fully. Explain what enforcement action you would take, and as to the parties, And then what would you do with the truck? Is a question that needs to be mentioned. In your reply post, examine another student's post that contrasts with yours. Defend your position regarding the questions that you addressed in your initial post in that reply post to whoever it is you selected. Remember, post first. Kind of late to be telling you that, but you already know that your initial post has to be submitted before you can even see anybody else post in order to reply. Okay. Any questions about the discussion post? Type in the chat box and I'll see it. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Okay. All right. Looks like everybody's good. All right. So now let's get out of student preview. I like to leave student preview for the written assignment. And let's look at this. So here are the details. So it's a three parts. Now, in this scenario, in the first one, you're going to follow this. And then you're going to respond as the police, from the police officer's perspective. From the police officer's perspective, I know well about that because I've done that before. And it's going to be a minimum of 1 page. 1 page just for part one. And you need to have citations in the body. Now, you only need one reference page. You don't need reference page for part one, reference page for part two, or reference page for part three. Only one. So it's a minimum of 1 page. Explain whether or not the elements of a hate crime, which you had to have explained, have been met. Explain another crime that Luke may have committed, and how were the elements of the crime satisfied or met. In the second part, you're a defense attorney. I spent many years doing that, defending individuals. So in this part, you'll analyze and apply hate crime laws from the perspective of a defense attorney. And you're going to use this scenario, not the stuff up there, but scenario in 2. That's a minimum of 1 page as well. The elements must be stated to demonstrate what this was. Hate crime. What strategy will you use to show that Luke didn't intentionally target? So remember, you're defending him. So you want to try to come up with some information to demonstrate that he was not committing a hate crime. Okay, because we'll talk about what hate crimes do as far as basic criminal charges such as battery. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Then the third part, which also is a 1-page requirement. By the way, it's double space. Please do it double space. Please have citations in the body. Don't throw me a gratuitous citation, but citations in the body and references at the end. So now you're going to go from the perspective of a detective. And I've done that as an investigator, asked to analyze the case report submitted by the patrol officer responding to the call. Okay. So you're going to use this scenario in this short paragraph and complete this part of the assignment addressing in a minimum of, again, 1 page. And first define femicide. Secondly, explore a hate crime law and determine if cases of femicide are hate crimes. All right, why they are or why aren't they? Make sure you include um, research, reference page with APA citation. I've already said that, but I'm just emphasizing it. And then here's a place where you can get some help. Again, repeating it allows save the assignment as a Word document. Okay, and so then you know how the submission works. All right. Now let's take a look at the rubric itself. So in the criteria, I've already kind of explained it. It's really the same thing here. So you want to get 1/4 of your grade will be affected by how well you do this. Notice my rubric doesn't have the other sections. I only do excellent because if you don't, you'll lose points for this off of the 25% or 25 percentage points. Then defense attorney. So each are graded independently. And then finally, the APA and credible sources. No Wikipedia, there it is once again, or similar things. So that's the rubric. I will comment in the grade book about what you did or did not do. By the way, if you did well, you won't see a comment, because I had a student once says, okay, I got 100. What was my feedback? I laughed and I said, did you understand the question you asked? And then they said, you know, I feel funny now that I said it. I said, no, that means you did everything that the inside that little box that it said. Therefore, I'm obligated to give you all the credit for that section. So you got see, if you look at the rubric in the sense of what I said many times to students as a checklist. I know some professors don't say that, but it is. It's a checklist to remind you of what you have to do to get the maximum number of points. And everybody in my class, no matter what you might think, you are capable of getting hundreds on every paper. You heard me? That's my expectation of you. I think that you would probably not really want a professor who allowed you to get by with less. And I'm not going to overstate. And the reason is because remember what I said at the beginning. And those of you who've had me for other classes, a few of you have, understand where I'm coming from. Excuse me. I do educated, professional, and ethical criminal justice in students. So the one thing that the school really appreciates about me is I'm very dogmatic about encouraging my students to put their best foot forward at all times, even under adverse circumstances, as you know from listening to my story. Adversity may slow you down, but it should not knock you out. Everybody's got that. And I wouldn't be me if I didn't do that. Any questions before we move on about the written assignment? Any questions are fair game. Don't be bashful or ashamed. Any? Type in the chat box. Okay. Jennifer says none yet. Okay. And one other student hadn't said anything yet, but here's the point. It's okay if sometimes students say, well, you know, I'll reserve it that. Please do me a favor. Try to email me and email me as little as possible. I would prefer getting a text message from you and or a phone call about issues, because you know what happens when you try to respond to a person's text message with a text message. You can always lose something in the communication. It could be a critical point that would turn on the light bulb up here to get you to understand and operate that way. So I'm willing to do it any hour except the 25th hour of the day. I mean it. And that's just how I roll. So let's do what I said earlier in our announcement. Start strong and finish strong. Okay. So now you've got the assignments for the week. Of course, I don't have to tell you this, but you can click on this and you find your live recording under here after we finish. Right now, you click on this and it'll bring you into where we are now. And then you'll see two Professor Richard Wrights, which is disastrous. One's enough. Okay. No, it will create feedback problems for the recording and for you as a student as well. All right. So that's a place where you can find it. And I try to, as much as possible, hyperlink it. So all you have to do is click on it. Right. And then the live classroom lecture, we already talked about that. So we're going to talk about drug laws, drunk and drugged driving, distracted driving, and then hate crimes. We're going to conclude, and then we're going to go over these practice things briefly to help you out. Okay. So now, these are crimes against what we call moral values. It's been said by some that some of these crimes, oops, I clicked back on the assignment. Didn't need to do that. I meant to hit to this. There we go. It's been said by some that drug laws only hurt the person and that they're not really committing crimes against others. I beg to differ with you. If any of you have been in my drugs and crime class, or will be, you'll hear me talk about this. I'm teaching drugs and crime at the same time I'm teaching this now. Some of you are in both classes, and you will hear me say time and time again that the title of the course speaks to the circumstances, drugs and crime. And actually, drugs lead to crime. If we had a handle on our drug epidemic, you know, we got this COVID-19, pandemic, but we must at the same time remember that we will, until we address the issues, or as we say, grab the bull by the horns, deal with the issue of drugs. The law aspects and the criminal side generally should be intended for individuals who distribute and sell the drugs. Now, there are two kinds of individuals who distribute and sell drugs. There are those who that's their business. That's how they make their living. That's how they make their profits, at the expense of poor people who are addicted or become addicted to their products. Thus, they will commit crimes to support their drug habits. Purely said. So what does that bring us back to? Two parts. Number one, the extended term sentences or the long sentences for a person who is an addict is a waste of time. It's a waste of time. Addicts are sick people. Addicts need to be cured. We don't lock up people who get the virus. We don't lock up people who get the flu. We don't lock up people who get a cold. We don't lock up people who get other kinds of illnesses. We treat them by recognizing that we must get to the core of the problem. That's why certain medications, certain um, illnesses require um, that we use drugs that will treat those causes, that are antibiotics, that regular medicine won't, but antibiotics have to. And then there are times when we don't use antibiotics because they're counterproductive. Antibiotics don't help in curing a cold, for example, but it deals with viruses. And I'm not an expert in that area, but I talk to experts, and I respect the professionalism of experts and the science and the knowledge they have. So then we come to the issue of these cartels, these people who live a luxurious life, who live well because of the fact that they have a product that is out there, and individuals will get these products because they're hooked on them and they have to have them to exist. One of the things that we've done is we've got drugs to treat drugs. Like, for example, we've got methadone that I'm not happy about. I'm opposed to it because it's like a rubber, it's like a Band-Aid, should I say, not a rubber band, a Band-Aid that goes over something that needs to be taken care of. It's like you go into surgery, and instead of sewing you up, they throw a Band-Aid over it. It's not going to last. So we have to get to the core of the illness that involves appropriate financing. The laws passed will not cure that. That is why you're going to discover, and I'm actually taking care of this section by talking about it to help you understand from the perspective of a law enforcement person or from the perspective of a corrections person, that you all are going to end up with some psychological approaches, psychiatric approaches, your clinician approach, even as a person commits a crime. That's why you'll discover when you take drugs in crime that one of the things that we discuss is how you save lives. Therefore, you've heard. Have either of you guys, have you heard of Narcan or Noxalone? Okay, and if you have, you're aware that it's like an antibiotic. It stops or address what that opioid or heroin does to the body, and attempts to save that person's life. Unfortunately, there are times when it does not. So, or they say almost bringing a person back to life or keeping them from dying. So we have to approach it from that perspective. We need the laws, though, in place to be able to um, arrest those who are mercenary. And I call mercenary people drug dealers. Remember, I count drug dealers as not the users who are drug dealers, because they have a different goal. They're not really there to make money. They're there to have a way of life that they've got themselves caught up into. But the predatory people and the mercenary ones are the ones who live well, drive nice cars, and use that as their means of living. So that's what these laws are intended to do. So we have the Uniform Controlled Substance Act, which places drugs based on schedule, and the actual um, lower the schedule number, one. You have a high potential for abuse. Notice that it defines it as a high potential for abuse, no currently medical use in the United States, lack of demonstrated safety under medical supervision. And then they list in here some things. Now, there is one thing in there that is probably on its way off of that list. Anybody have any idea just from this list? Because these are examples. From these examples, which one is falling off or heading toward? Absolutely. Absolutely. Marijuana. And the reason is because, as we know, there is legislation in almost all jurisdictions in the state level to legalize marijuana. Then the federal government is even working on legislation so that it will not be a federal crime either. But the other thing is that marijuana has been demonstrated to have some medical use. So it's kind of a contradiction in terms. And it's a good question to ask. It says, well, wait a minute, professor. If it says no currently accepted medical use, marijuana has been known for years to be medically prescribed for those who have glaucoma or some eye pressure issues, which glaucoma basically is. And so it's given. However, one of the problems with the marijuana in the Schedule 1 is that it's cut with other items. I won't go into the details, but there's some specific things that are used to for these predatory people that sell it on the streets or drug dealers to make it go further. They cut it with other dangerous additives that can result in your death. So anyway, so Schedule 1, Schedule 2 has the same high potential for abuse, but it has accepted medical use with restrictions, which is true because oxycodone, fentanyl, opium, cocaine. Now, I don't know about that, but the point of the matter is that under a doctor's supervision, some of these things are utilized for health reasons. However, the problem is, good people, is that the oxycodone issue can lead to addiction to heroin and cocaine itself, and it can cause your death, especially the cocaine. I've shared this in my other class that my baby sister passed away with an overdose of cocaine. That was probably one of the hardest things I've had to do um, in terms of dealing with life. I mean, in addition to what you know about me in my childhood, but as an adult, I was having to stand over my baby sister's body and commit her body to the earth at an earlier age than necessary, you know. But it was cocaine. It was crack cocaine. Excuse me. As a attorney and as a police officer in a town called Ford Heights, south suburbs, which was known as the crack cocaine capital, I witnessed many times individuals um, lose their lives, lose their minds. And what happened with cocaine when I was in the academy, I saw a picture of it, is that when people get high on that stuff, what they eventually do is like a balloon. You know, when you keep blowing a balloon up and it expands, then finally it maxes out and then it bursts. Well, that's what happens to your heart. Think about that. And that's a horrible, horrible way to die. But that's what these things do. Then Schedule 3, you start to get the things that you can get over the counter: Tylenol, codeine, Suboxone, ketamine, anabolic steroids. It's the fact that they're abused by individuals. All right, and then coming down to all the way down to Valium and some others, and then Schedule 5 deals with uh, using. I had a guy that I knew. He was a syrup addict. That's what we used to call him, because he could take a bottle of cough syrup, and he would take it and he would turn it up like a bottle of water, and he would drink it, and then his eyes would roll back, and I mean he would start slurring his speech and everything. So anyway, that's the drug issue that we're facing. We've already talked about crack cocaine, and the key thing, and then we go through the legislation and the laws of saying no to drug and the war on drugs, which is like, um, how should I say, a mass failure, because as it says here in our blurb here, because the drug problem still exists. And so now we've got different approaches when it comes to like marijuana regulations, and now we have drug courts. I represented individuals in drug courts, and most of the time in drug courts, it wasn't to determine innocence or guilt. It was to seek to get help for individuals. And then you can, we already talked about the legalization, so I'm going to skip over that. If you want to see the control substance laws in full, you can click on this link. So possession of controlled substances, there's what we call actual possession, where it can actually be on you. And then there's constructive possession, where a person has the ability to control the item, but it's not on their person, such as in their car or something like that, maybe in their house or something like that. And so they talk about the fact that people who more so in active possession get a higher sentence than those with constructive. Notice what it says in Ohio: knowingly possess. So constructive possession can possibly put you in a situation where you may not know, but it's there. It may not even belong to you. But actual possession is knowing, or should know, a controlled substance, which fits under one of those categories above, or a controlled substance analog. We haven't said anything about them, but I'm going to just briefly tap on them. Controlled substance analog are they're manufactured. They're what we call like designer drugs, K2 or Spice. They look almost like chunky or candy. Some of you might not know what chunky candy is, but it was called chunky. It was a candy, and it was wrapped up, and it looks like candy, or it can look like a mint or something, but it's because of what it's been made out of, or what the ingredients that are in there. It can send a person on a trip, and so it's a cheap high drug. One of the things about it is that drug tests do not detect those. You can actually pass a drug test along with those. And then these are different laws that are here dealing with this. Once again, this is an area where clearly people who are simply just trying to escape, who are addicts, addicted, or there's people who need deliverance and help, are going to be uh, uh, addicted to this, no matter how many years you give them, if you don't address the issue. Okay, so that's it about drugs. Quite a bit there, but we'll move faster through the other sections. So let's move on to, by the way, before I leave that, did anybody have any questions about your understanding about how you should be looking at this? Remember, it's a different approach now. No longer locking up and throw away the keys. We got to make sure that we address it. You're talking about some really qualified people who are in law enforcement, or people who have some medical training or background. Uh, I've had some medical assistants. I've had some nurses. I know one person who was a nurse and a lawyer, and she was very good at dealing with that. So what we want you guys to understand is that these are not bad people, because they're sick people, and we have a cure for them, and we want to try to work on that. So if we take away the audience, or it's like any other product. If you take a business course, there is no demand for an item, it goes down. Okay, it disappears or gets minimized. Drunk driving, drunk or drug driving, more drunk driving, where individuals uh, are dying at high rates of number. Look at some of these statistics just from 2017. Look, notice it. Think about this. So it's not a light thing to taking a drink and driving. 28 people each day in motor vehicle crashes involve alcohol impaired drivers. I mean, I I look at the news and it's either a gunshot or an accident. Think about this, people, when you're driving your car and you're going in north on a road without a divider, and there's a car going south, and it comes over and crosses the line. It could kill you. It's a deadly weapon. So the person is operating using a deadly weapon, which is that vehicle, but that person under the control of those drugs, they don't have the capacity or ability. One person dies every 53 minutes. Every 53 minutes. So that means that before this lecture is over, one person dies. Alcohol impaired driving accounts for 31%. Over, I mean, just a lot, almost 1/3 of driving fatalities. A total of 9,967 people died in 2014. Well, that's up now. And the financial impact, not to mention insurance, is devastating. One of the things that we did to try to deal with this was to change the blood alcohol content before 1988, which was 0.10. If you took a breathalyzer and you blew 0.10, then you were deemed to be driving under influence, what we call illegal per se. However, because of organizations like MAD, you guys familiar with MAD? Okay, for those who don't know what that means, it's Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And then there are other organizations that have come together to deal with the issue, to say, hey, we need to change that because a person is out of control before they get to 10.10, 0.10. So now it's 0.8. So this was to try to make it easier to get these people off the road. And that's one of the key things, is get people from behind the wheel who are caught in this. I've represented people in DUIs, and they are devastating. I had one client who had a friend who he was driving under influence, and he had an accident, and it resulted in the death of his friend. That wiped my client out for years. He needed he didn't just go to jail, which was bad enough, but he had to live with the rest of his life that he contributed to the death of his friend. Okay, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and he had to serve some time. But the point of the matter is that all 50 states say operation of a vehicle, a motor vehicle, upon a highway, roadway, parking lot. Because people didn't know, in a parking lot or driveway accessible to the public while impaired by alcohol. So here's the question I asked you. Are you in physical control of a vehicle? Okay. You should not be in physical control of a vehicle while under the influence. And the statutes make that clear. Now, It's going so far as if you are in a parking lot sitting with a running car or with the keys in the ignition, that even before you've moved that vehicle, you can be arrested for physical control of a vehicle while under the influence. Notice what it says here in this sample statute here of Ohio: being in the driver's position of the front seat or in the driver's position of a streetcar or a trolley and having the vehicle's streetcars or ignition key or other ignition device. Okay, so now I have a car. I don't have an ignition key. And you're seeing more and more cars like that. You push the button, right? Put your foot on the brake and it starts your car. And so therefore, if you're sitting behind the wheel and you're under the influence, you can possibly still be held responsible for it because the car is not running, but it could run at any moment. Well, somebody can say, well, the battery's dead, which just happened to me yesterday. But it still has the potential. So um, when you find individuals in situations, the question is, when a driver crash and injure others, the criminal acts or injury caused by the intoxicated use of a motor vehicle. The injury must be caused to another person, which can include passengers in the vehicle. Like I said earlier, a drunk driver cannot be charged with homicide or injury by intoxicated use of vehicle for injuring or killing themselves, but anyone else. Okay. So it's a serious problem, and we deal with that. So we have what we call field sobriety tests, or SFSs. And this can be done in addition to the blood alcohol content issue, where you do things on the road, walk the line, stand on one foot. The officer put their fingers up and follow, have them to do it. But the point of the matter is that there's other things that we observe as well. The driving behavior, such as weaving or driving through a traffic signal, striking a curb. I have seen that, good people, where a car have come down and gone from one side of the curb to the other. I mean, I've seen it in late at night, early in the morning, and in the afternoon as well. And look at this person. Look at the appearance of the individual, the odor of it, red or bloodshot eyes, slurred speech. Now, by the way, I do know of instances, and I know at least one for sure, of a person who was charged with DUI years ago, but he had a stroke, and the odor of what was coming from him was not alcohol, but it was something in his blood system that made his breath smell like alcohol, those kind of things. By the way, did you know swallowing your mouthwash can do that to you too? Some people don't know that, but it can. So anyway, these are some of the tests I was talking about. You see some of them right there, right? And then there's um, a PDF that has a lot more. And so one of the things that you should be aware of, brilliant people, I say this facetiously, think that if they don't take the blood alcohol content or breathalyzer, that you can't be found guilty. That's not true, because remember who has the burden of proof. It is the prosecution. And if you do anything to um, help make it impossible to determine your blood alcohol content, then by driving, you give what we call implied consent. Your implicit means that if you operate a vehicle on a roadway and a law officer requests you to submit to the test, it's implied that you will grant consent. Penalties are increased if you refuse. And if you refuse and law enforcement officers still wish to proceed, they must then get a warrant. So that was established in 2013. Before, when I was practicing, I retired in 2000. You didn't have that, but the Missouri versus McNeely case, and look at what it said that they could do before McNeely. Law enforcement officers could force a blood draw in a drunk driving case because the evidence dissipates quickly, um, and so it's considered as an exigent circumstance to get that test done. But the McNeely decision said that no, you can't do that. You have to get a warrant to force a blood draw in a drunk driving case unless some other exigent circumstances that require immediate action can be established. And the burden is difficult. Take a look at that case and you'll see what I'm talking about. All right. Drug driving is individuals using drugs, and it could be legal or illegal drugs. Driving under the influence of your medication. I take medication, but on my side of my medication it says refrain from driving after taking this medication. Some of the medications have that as we lawyers have put this disclaimers basically to protect the manufacturer of the drugs and the distributor of the drugs, like the drugstores and doctors, because of the fact that we're saying we don't recommend you do that. If you do it, you're on your own, and you're not holding them responsible for it. All right. So there are people now who are what we call DREs, um, drug recognition experts. They have a lot of classroom training to identify drug impaired people. They are called in court, and they're sometimes even called to the scene. And there are some law enforcement officers who are trained in that area. This is something to help combat it. And then when you get a chance to, you can take a look at this video, which is a half an hour long, and it tells you a little bit more about DREs. Okay. Distracted driving is very simply, as you can see, any activity that diverts the attention from driving. It could be talking or texting on your phone. Texting on your phone is a common one. Did you know it can be eating and drinking? I'm not talking about alcohol. You can eat a sandwich while driving. Uh, Talking to people in your vehicle, messing with your stereo or navigation system or anything that takes you away. As you already know, that most jurisdictions now have hands-free for talking on the phone. But I can tell you this, and you tell me if you understand what I'm saying. You can drive your car, and you can be um, placed into like a trance. You ever drive your car someplace and then you got so far and you didn't realize you made it that far? You know what I'm talking about. That's because your mind is not focused on that road and that vehicle. Or either sometimes it's people who, yeah, that's right. Exactly, Maisie. How did I get here? But you got to be careful because daydreaming and driving is disastrous. You agree? Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Or night dreaming. The point of the matter is that you have to remember you got a high powered um, vehicle that you're operating, and you can hurt yourself, kill someone else, seriously injure people permanently, and those kind of things. So there are statutes now, like here in our state, to deal with this electronic communication devices prohibit a person from operating a motor vehicle while running an electronic communication, right, which is defined as, look at this, not limited to a handheld wireless phone. How many times have you heard people, you're at a stoplight, and maybe you're guilty of it. I hope not, but the point of the matter is you get a text, you got to stop and check that text. That's bad, but people do it. They say, oh, I was at a stoplight. I was just briefly. No, you have to be alert at all times and those kind of things. And I've had, and this is one of the things that I say, because I got to move on, but is that these navigation systems, I always wondered, I says, do they realize that people looking at their navigation system just for a split second is almost like texting? You agree? Do you agree with that? Yeah. The point of the matter is anything that even for a split second, you know, so those kind of things. And then even with hands-free devices, we have the same problem as well. But the point of the matter is the key thing is that we're trying to do everything we can to help deal with the issue of um, distracted driving, along with drunk driving and drug driving. Okay. All right. So those are just some points there. Don't text and drive. So the last thing we're going to talk about is the hate crime. Now, you just need to hunker up and hang on. I know we're getting near the end here, but I'm going maybe a few minutes over, but I want to focus on explaining this. Um, a hate crime is a crime that is committed against a person because of either their race, sexual preference, or disability, just to name a few. They're unique because in order for the prosecution to prove a hate crime, they must absolutely prove that the person, when they committed the crime, did so based on that race, that sex, that national origin, their religious belief, those kinds of things. So um, it is important that you understand that it was so serious that there was legislation passed in 68. This was even when I was in high school, because I didn't graduate until 69. The federal statute made it a crime to use or threaten to use force against a person because of their race, religion, or national origin. And since then, legislation has evolved in many other jurisdictions, the states themselves. And so the key thing about hate crimes is to prevent, as it says, criminals from intentionally selecting classes of people and committing crimes against them, such as a normal battery, a robbery, vandalism, or arson. It escalates the sentence, and it should, because what you're doing is it's a racist or sexist move. And okay, if you don't like the person's being a member of LGBT, that's no reason for you to assault them. You need to respect people. We teach that here in the school, dealing with diversity and inclusion. And so even if you have different religious beliefs, that still does not give you the right to attack somebody because they believe differently. And so when you do that, then you are demonstrating a hate crime. And so there's some details in here, but it boils down to what I just said a few minutes ago. Now, the case of Wisconsin versus Mitchell um, increased hate crimes. For example, the state of Florida evidencing prejudice while committing offense contains some of the following sentencing, a misdemeanor of the second degree is reclassified and it goes bumped up to first degree. And you'll see here something that's a misdemeanor could become a felony and so forth and so on. So you might want to take a look at this journey to a hate-free millennium. Okay. And Lord knows, with the country and the state that is in right now, hate crimes have increased over the last 4 years, 5 years, at a magnitude and level that makes me shed tears because of the fact that, you know, you know, people will, do you know that a person will attack somebody because they are a different race and have a mate that is of a different race? Sickness. It's sickening. And you should get a lot of jail time for that. But what we need to understand is that we need to discourage hate. Hate is terrible, people. And if it has to do with you committing a crime and it's manifested usually by words that you say, actions that you take following those words. And we're going to talk about a little bit of that. All right. So that's pretty much it for this week. But I want to take you through a few of these. So hang in there, please, with me while I go through this, because this is important for you. So the lecture, as far as me giving you information. So, but I'm going to test your knowledge now and see if you where you are here. And if you look at this, I'm not gonna go over this. For drunk driving and forced blood draws, you're going to look at the Missouri versus Neely, and then look at this document, download it, and it suggests and help you. Please take a look at that for practice so that you understand more about what we talked about drunk driving and forced blood draws. Very important. Key terms. We have key terms for you that we've actually talked about. Every one of these we've mentioned. I'm looking through. Yep, we've covered every one of these. Drugs, and then hate crimes was the last thing. And remember, intentionally committing a crime against another and selecting the victim or their property, defacing it. I've known, for example, I know of a pastor friend who had who's African American, bought a church. Their church was in a community that wasn't primarily African American, and there were KKK crosses burnt in the yard, stuff like that, crazy stuff, you know. So anyway, hate crime. All right, so now identifying the drug schedule. I'm going to let you go through that and take a look at it. And so here's a little activity that you can go through. By the way, good people, I'm preparing you for your exam. Remember. So what you want to do is, and I'm not going to match each of these, but what you could do, drugs that have acceptable medical use with some restrictions, you'll put that with whatever and then submit it. If it's wrong, you'll continue until you get it right. All right. And that takes you all the way from schedule 1 all the way to schedule 4, schedule 5 drugs. Okay. So you can do that. And then the last thing, wake up, everybody, because I represent the truth when I say this. You all have acknowledged it, that I told you that in the practice exam, that the midterm exam, which was week 3, that you would find some of these practice quiz questions in there, and they were there. As reported, several students came back and said, "You're right." I said, "I know. I told you. I'm not kidding with you." Okay. So anyway, I got to go back. My bad. I got to go back because I hit that too quick. So here we go. According to the federal law, marijuana is a what drug with high potential for abuse? What schedule is it? Yes. So you can, yes. And we already had discussion about that. You are a police officer and you've stopped a motor vehicle for speeding. While standing along the open driver's side window, you smell burnt marijuana coming from the vehicle. A search reveals marijuana in the center console. The driver claims it's not his. You may still take enforcement because the driver is in what possession of the marijuana? You say absolute. Anybody else? Some say actual. Well, first of all, absolute is not one of the choices because we didn't talk about that. Partial, we didn't talk about that either. We only talked about actual or constructive. So if it's not on that person, but their vehicle, it's going to be constructive. I guess you got to be careful. Don't allow yourself to be psyched into saying um, the person, um, you smelled it on them. You smelled it coming from the vehicle, but you have to verify that. And so when you do search the vehicle and find the marijuana, then that person can still be charged because they're in constructive control. It's their vehicle. It's like it's like people get in my car. If they have a drink in their hand or a bottle, I tell them get out of my car. And I check my car and make sure there's nothing left in there. Because if you get stopped by the police and you're in there by yourself, I mean you might have a case that you can get off with. But it creates a problem for you because you're in constructive possession. Remember we talked about the definition of constructive possession. The test is going to do that to you. Doggone it. Okay. While searching, a man who is under arrest for a warrant, you locate a substance that is discovered to be homemade chemical properties, similar to ecstasy. This substance is considered a what? The words tell you the answer to this question. Homemade with chemical properties, similar to ecstasy. It's a controlled substance known as an analog. Remember I talked about that? K2 and spice. Remember that? Remember the facts give you the answer. While under arrest, you locate a substance that is discovered to be homemade. As soon as you see something like that, oh, similar to ecstasy, it's not going to be a Schedule 4. It's not going to definitely be illegal. And it's not going to be a Schedule 5. It's going to be that. All right. Pay attention to the language. I'm done. This is the last one I'll do with you. Incident to a lawful arrest. You search Jane and find cocaine in her front pants pocket. Jane say, I had cases like this. Jane claims it's not hers while stating, they aren't my pants. But she was wearing them, right? I'm sorry, I gotta laugh at this. I've had so many times people say they were my brother's pants. But you arrest Jane because she is an example of what possession? Which one? Geez. Which one? Pick one. Yeah, yes, that's the one. Not constructive. There's not absolute, but actual. Absolute is not a choice ever. If you ever see absolute, don't go for it. It's a trick. Don't go for partial. It's either going to be actual or it's going to be constructive. In this case, Shane, you wearing the pants around here. Oh gosh. Oh, if you ever become a criminal defense lawyer or you're going to court, you hear some stories, it'll crack you up. So anyway, that's the end of that. I don't want to hold you much longer. Oh, buddy. But that in itself at the end, that I mean, if when you're if you're in court and you hear that, the judge has to call order of the court because everybody's because you're gonna be laughing, you know. "Well, these are I just wore these pants. I thought these were my pants. These were my brother's pants or my sister's pants." Baby, you are in actual possession because you are actually wearing those pants. Okay, all right. Yeah, guys. So seriously though, those can make you laugh, but that's going to be some like on the test. After you take your week 6 test, you can send me a message saying, "Professor, you were right." I said, "I know that. I told you that." Okay. Any questions about this week? Looks like none. Okay. All right. So, all good. Okay. Now, any other questions? Yeah, Lynn. Constructive possession. That's it. Constructive possession. Give me that, and you get your points. All right. Well, guys, I'm done. Again, I just want to make sure that you have these things down because you're welcome because you're heading imminently for the exam next week and enjoy your week. If you need me, you know what to do. I'm here for you guys, and let's hey, let's do this thing. Let's do well. When I grade my papers, let me go through and say, okay, Then I'll go through, no. All right. See you next week, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard for the final lecture, week 6, in this course. See you next week. Just my announcement to you is that next term, which starts in the fall, I will be teaching Introduction to Corrections. I think some of you have been in that class with me already. I think Jennifer, didn't you take Maisie, you were in that class with me too, right? Um, and drugs and crime. So then, okay, yeah, okay. So you know what I was talking about my spiel about drugs and crime and all those things. So cool. That is good. I'm glad. A lot of people do take drugs and crime with it, but I think um, some people end up taking criminal law later. So, all right, guys. See you next week. But I'll be teaching that and then contemporary issues in criminal justice. That'll be for students who are about ready to get their associates, and I enjoy that course particularly well. It's J280. And then term 2, I've forgotten what it is, but I got a ways to go before that. So see you next week. Oh, okay. All right. I was excited to have my students be excited about taking classes. And I'm really excited when students say, "Professor, what class are you teaching?" And they go to their counsel. I get calls from advisors and them asking, say, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" Says, "People are asking for you." I says, that's because I'm not an easy professor. I'm just detailed. But I make my students go to a higher level of performance. So anyway, see you next week. Stay safe.